Okay, welcome back to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. I, of course, am Novaria, and we are breaking into the second DLC of the original game. And so we end up with a couple major things that need to be mentioned, I suppose. The first is that Borderlands 1 was made in the time of the first batch of DLCs that ever came out. And it was kind of easy to tell. While the first DLC that I showcased was the whatchamacallit, Jakobs Cove DLC, which had to do with
Shit and meatballs! Didn't think I'd ever see your dumb ass again. Did you really open the vault? Hey, that steel chick check her clothes off yet? Not. I'm gonna need details though.
uh-huh. Right. Um Anywho.
Hey, act all casual like when I say this. I'm a speaking code, so I hope you have the mental capacity to follow. Your lady friend told me to send you to Moxie's place when you stop by. If you know what I'm saying.
Anywho. The whole thing with the original batch of DLC was that the first kind of batch that cropped up was, of course, a zombie DLC. That more or less makes sense. The second batch that cropped up was this beast. And this was when DLC was first really starting to get its feet wet. It struggles in many of the ways that I wish I could better articulate at this moment. T-Bone Junction, for lack of better terminology, is a North and South Railway style DLC. And that's pretty well the best way to describe it.
What I'm gonna need is an X372 supercharger, but not the 373. There's recall on that thing and the kind of people burning live and shit. Also a big old tank of nitrous and one of them fancy exhaust booger things. Oh, you know what it does, man.
Anywho, the central location of this DLC is right where we're at. To the north, we have the prison. To the south, we have Moxie's place, as well as a couple other notable small locations along the way, and the final boss. That's all well and good. The major issue with this railway style is that it doesn't matter where you start. Well, it matters a bit where you start, but to get anything done requires a lot of time and transportation.
Oh, smoking
And
Jackson cinnamon, that is a monster.
that
That's gonna be sweet.
ends up causing a lot of concern as in terms of valuing the player's time, as it takes a good 5 to 10 minutes of just driving to get from one end to the other on one of the main roads in this section. Oh, hello. Um, and so while that might seem all well and good, there's a second section to this.
An Omega Senshu order has been issued for you. There will be 5 teams assembled to guarantee the objective is successful.
Well, shoot, looks like the passenger seat's gonna have to go bye-bye to fit that bad boy in there. I'll get to work on that right now.
Okay, cool. Anywho, as I was getting, this DLC has distance as the biggest problem with it. When you get to A or B, it's fine, more or less. But getting there takes a lot out of the player, and there are no fast travel stations or save points anywhere along this. Only where you start. Which means that you always end up having to either start or end every single section of the game. Well, you always have to start where I am. And this, on its own, is a huge problem. And it's one of the major contenders for why the DLC of the original Borderlands is not typically looked on too fondly. I say typically because there are some moments that it shines, but its moments are unfortunately few and far between, generally speaking. That being said, we're talking about Borderlands 1. What does T-Bone Junction have in store for us? Well, this more or less is meant to introduce yet another character, one that would become essential later down the line. The character I'm of course talking about is Athena. Now, Athena, it was for the longest time an unplayable character. She just kind of showed up. She was a member of Atlas and fought her way through countless battles and even created her own assassin squad. And generally speaking, she is viewed as a very high priority individual. After the events of Borderlands 2, Lilith is planning on collecting and dealing with anybody who was considered a friend of Handsome Jack, a companion of sorts. And that leads us to where Athena comes in. She was one of the individuals hired shortly after the events of this DLC to help Jack take back control of his entire station. Woofty woofty. Lots of conversationalists today, apparently. Anyways, we have made the monster. We're going to have the Digistruct module take over this for a couple of moments. And it is done. I admit, I kind of like this, like the Digistruct world, so to speak. It makes a lot of sense and is rather impressive use of what could, in many ways, be seen as simple technology. One of the things about Borderlands tech that I've always been enamored with is when you look at other tech that shows up in video games, typically there's, I suppose, three basic outlooks that you come across fairly frequently. The first is the Digistruct tech. This shows up in Borderlands, Metroid, and it's effectively a you have armor, but you aren't weighed down by it until you actually need it mentality. And that is pretty well ties itself up in a nice, neat little bow. Here you go. The second major way that it tends to show up is in making sure that the individual doesn't need traditional armor to begin with. This is the form of shields such as what Mordecai has on his hip. It is a shield that protects from bullet fire and whatnot at the expense of electricity. You can also find this in games like Halo. And that kind of ties itself up nicely. Yes, I am jumping ahead a little bit because the amount of driving in this DLC is absurd. I've already cut probably a good 3 minutes of driving out. And because I'm me and I want to be a brat, I am choosing not to use the cannon on the monster right now because I'm continuing with the trend I had started with in the main game, which is that I'm going to be completing each of the 3 DLCs without the use of any major, what's the word? With only snipers and revolvers. That way, I can be sure that I can say the entire game was beaten start to finish using only said weapons. There are a couple minor things that I might look into at a later date. Stuff like beating the game with only, I don't know, fisticuffs. But that will be a later date, not something that will come about right away here. I'm not quite that crazy. Speaking of, a little bit of a deep dive into the world building for a moment. So, we know from what is mentioned in Borderlands 1, 2, and 3, Pandora was considered a untapped resource, believed to house a vault, a cache of ancient alien technology far surpassing anything that humanity had found prior. This vault was, of course, meant to bring about a new age. On, I believe it was called Promethea, the Dahl Corporation came across this A cache of ancient alien technology. And it virtually and immediately turned the Dahl Corporation into a superpower, unlike anything the galaxy had seen prior. The Atlas Corporation, which is considered the primary villains of the first Borderlands. Oh, hi there. Um, the Atlas Corporation wanted a little piece of the pie, so to speak. And so they took over Pandora, believing that it could potentially house another vault, and sent Patricia Tanis off to send off to Pandora to see if she could figure out the mysteries of the vault and whatever, and what else she could. She, of course, lost her mind to what is Pandora's rather chaotic nature, and that's pretty well all we get out of that. This is what I'll call a second coming for the Atlas Corporation. In Borderlands 1, the after the fall of Commandant Steele, the Atlas Corporation wants to get back at the Vault Hunters, believing that they are owed retribution for this crime, shall we say, of these, well, we'll call them ragamuffins or rebellious types, believing that the rebellious individuals of Pandora were owed retribution. And so they come back fighting, believing themselves to be just. And the only reason they want what they want is because, well, they're greedy. There's a lot of, I suppose, not so subtle statements about corporate greed in this particular franchise. Something that does not fall on deaf ears very often. But one thing I want to mention about the Atlas Corporation is that their shtick, their whole identity, is based around their military might. Where Dahl Corporation has a military and a technology, their technology, from my understanding, is more about traversal, about getting from one area to the next. Think of it like wormhole tech. The Atlas Corporation focus on military. This includes weapons, shielding. Effectively, the Atlas Corporation's weapons were the everyman type of weapon. Anybody could use it because they were all very consistently built to be just good firearms. Of course, we have to turn a little bit into or towards the third major corporation that has shown up in what I'll call the original Borderlands trilogy, that being 1, 2, and the prequel, none other than Hyperion. Hyperion is a little bit of a black sheep where it comes to where it matters most in this particular section, as Hyperion's whole identity is based around their machining. They don't have a strong military. What they have is Digistruct technology, as well as the ability to create and maintain multiple Digistruct creatures and beings at any given point in time, to the point that the New U station is in fact Digistruct technology as well, just organic in nature. And that doesn't exactly sit well with me. Anywho, General Knox here.
All right. This is General Knox. I don't really want to be here. This planet smells like hemorrhoids wrapped in bacon. I sent Steel to this planet to take care of this little problem, and also because, seriously, have you heard her? She talks all the time. And hello, have you met our friend the sun? So, I guess, thanks for turning her into a meat kebab. Also, I'm gonna kill you and stuff. Cheers, mate.
Oh, General Knox was actually fairly nice about that, considering all things considered. Okay, so I am not running into that thing with a truck. That is a recipe for a bad time. So a little bit about our new rival, so to speak. The main antagonist of this section of the game is, of course, General Knox, Atlas's premier soldier. He is about what you'd expect from a soldier type of character. He's got himself his heavy-duty armor, explosive weapons, that kind of stuff. He's pretty laid back as far as everything goes. What I believe the line that they shouldn't have crossed was his depression, but I dare say that's part of what makes him a character in general. His demeanor being as negative as it is, I personally dislike, but his laissez-faire, you do you mentality, generally I actually kind of enjoy. He doesn't necessarily show up as a good character or bad character, more as this is my job, let me get on with it. And I can kind of respect that for what it is. Anywho, here we go, the second Assassin Squad. They're really not doing a very good job today. The Hera's Assassin Squad. Honestly, I don't mind the Assassins. I kind of wish they were a little bit stronger, because I've always found that the Assassin Squads left a lot to be desired as far as how easy they were to defeat. But that aside, it's not terrible. Anywho, onwards to Moxie.
Mr. Shank, is that you? If it's you, I already told you your money is no good. Oh, it's you. You won't need your money here. Tiger Grow.
Yeah, that's not creepy.
Excuse the mess, but a good kidnapping is never clean. Shank busted in and took Miss Athena for a little ride. You should have seen the fight she put up. That kitty has claws. Mr. Shank is after the chunk of change that Atlas has put on Athena's pretty little face. If you want him, you'll need to do some fancy driving. Luckily, I'm just the person to help with that. Are you ready to rescue the princess? I think you can handle it. Head out to the prison. You're looking for an outcropping near the base of the plateau with a ramp nearby. My
Anywho, we are gonna head back to the central location because we need a new ride. And again, I'm cutting out a lot because the only thing in between A and B was driving. And as much as I like driving, there's a lot of it in this DLC. So, anywho, we're at the first checkpoint to the south. And between exiting the main area, I've spent about 3 minutes worth of driving again. And it might not seem like much in a small section, but if you look at my waypoint marker, it is 90 meters just at the end of this road here, and it's over 1,000 from one end to the other. Now, I'm not saying that this is a deal breaker, but it makes replaying this section a little bit hard just in general. I would have liked to have something a little more, well, a little bit more lore to it, so to speak. Instead, we get a long highway that's more or less out of commission because Atlas decided not to maintain it. Lots of problems revolving around Atlas just up and leaving the planet. I mean, there was also the fact that Dull up and left the planet as well. That's, I suppose, a major point of contention within the world of Borderlands. Most of the enemies you face in Borderlands are the remnants of what would be a mining colony that was built by, I believe, Dull Corporation. The idea that they had was that if they could mine up the next vaults, that everything would be great, get the pieces of the key to the vault, and that was it. That was their hope. Get the pieces, get everything sorted, and they more or less found it. But for reasons that I can't describe and can't understand, they chose to leave the planet before the key was charged. The result of this is that they ended up in a circumstance where the Atlas Corporation could take over because there was nothing really holding anybody back at that point. It's small details, but if Dull had kept with what they were doing, kept mining, kept working, well, I'm not suggesting they mine like Moria. I am saying that if they would have kept going, they would have actually achieved their goal. Whereas effectively what they did, including leaving all of their workers behind, is that they more or less bankrupted themselves trying to find another vault. They ended up in a circumstance that was far from ideal for themselves. And I believe that if they would have kept going just a little bit longer, they would have had much more come out of the attempted mining operation. And Pandora wouldn't have fallen into decay. So, to explain it a little bit more clearly, every single one of the psychos, the raiders, the virtually every enemy type in the game, there are very they all have the same origin story in this game. And it is, quite simply, that every single one of them has one job. They were here to mine, to find the key to the vault. And when Dull Corporation left, they left behind all of the workers who now struggling and trying to, whoa, that's a nice little rainbow. Now they were dealing with a lack of identity, among other things. It became a battle of, well, which individual actually is going to take the role of leadership. And so these leaders that cropped up were characters like Nine Toes, Bonehead, Sledge, Mad Mel. All these bandit characters that crop up throughout the first half of the game. And you could also add characters like Crom, as well as Flint. Every single one of these characters was there for a reason. They weren't transplanted into the world like some might suggest, but rather they were involved in the world by kind of their existence in general was due to the negligence of Dahl Corporation. Atlas, while militaristic in nature and all about power and suppression of free thought and speech, they at least didn't give up. And good or bad, that's up to you to decide. I personally believe that the Atlas Corporation is, ironically, less evil than their counterparts. But be that as it may. Anyways, we're about halfway up the road now, and we're getting pretty close to the final goals of this area. The goal I'm hoping to reach today is to get Athena back. Athena is, of course, one of the pivotal characters for this. She has a plan that will be able to deal with the armory of General KNOXX. Effectively, she is unable to pay the Vault Hunters, at least in traditional means. What she offers instead is weapons. The entire vault of General KNOXX. The armory itself houses, I'm not joking, at least like 50 to 100 different treasure chests. And you can raid all of them once. And this kind of ties into one of the, I suppose, oversights of this DLC. To get into the vault, you need to get to Moxie, heading south. Get to the jail, heading north. Head back to the central location, talk to Athena, head back to the jail, or jail adjacent, get a key code, and then, after all of that is said and done, go all the way to the south again, past Moxie's, to get to General KNOXX. After beating him the first time, there will be side objectives where Marcus has bought and refurbished the vault, and he thinks it would be funny to let the player go through the vault again. After all, you've done it once, why not? And his whole shtick is effectively that it's entertainment. It's a running theme within Borderlands as a whole that many of the characters don't do what they do because they have a need to do it. They do what they do because they're bored. And I kind of see where they're coming from with. You live on a desert planet. You got one of two options. You either make droids or harvest cactus. And neither of those options sound very appealing. So, yeah, the death battles that they go through are their version of entertainment. You can see this throughout, actually, Borderlands 1. There are, that I am aware of, 3 PvP arenas. There is the Circle of Slaughter, the Circle of Death in the main game. There is also the Circle of Duty in KNOXX's DLC, which deals with taking down Atlas opponents. So now we have a Skag Arena, we have a Atlas Arena, and we have a Bandit Arena. And if that wasn't enough, they that idea came back full swing in Borderlands 2, as well as Borderlands 3, albeit in a much more limited capacity. Sorry, pre-sequel brought it back in a limited capacity. Along with that, there's also all consistently, to my knowledge, been an area or a DLC location specifically dedicated to just fending off round after round of enemies. And truth be told, sometimes those are pretty fun. I personally liked the Borderlands pre-sequel version over Borderlands 1's, as it's the one and only DLC that I absolutely refuse to play through a second time. The whatchamacallit, Moxie's Underdome Riot. In my original profile, I managed to beat the Underdome Riot on the harder difficulty once for each varying difficulty. The Underdome Riot, for what it is intended to be, is great. Turn Borderlands into a slightly more traditional shooter. Set every enemy to be the same level as the strongest player in the arena, and let your players go hog wild. Get them to fight absolutely as hard as they could ever want. And I, you know, overall, I can see that being a positive. But the issue comes from every single round it gets harder. And so there is no breathing room in this challenge for up to 2 hours straight. And so what starts as a pretty innocent premise continues into becoming one of the most long lasting and exhausting challenges that has come out of this franchise as a whole. Typically, most of the games, if you end up in a circumstance of such a caliber, there's something kind of humorous or story driven that is meant to carry the experience. Borderlands 1's Underdome Riot does not have that. It is non-stop, 100% combat. And part of it seems like it would be okay. Refacing old bosses like Hans and Franz, Captain Flint, or is it Captain or Baron Flint? I forget. Nine Toes, Bonehead, so on and so forth. They had the, I believe they had the right idea going with that route, but their execution didn't quite stick the landing. And unfortunately, it does leave a sour taste. Anywho, we are almost through the second phase of this DLC as a whole. And I admit, I kind of wish that there was more to this DLC. How do I put this? I like what they added. I like what they added in terms of the Atlas Corporation. The different versions of their military in the form of their assassin squads, in the form of their rocketeers, the weapons that they have, all tie in nicely to what Atlas Corporation was truly capable of. But, and there's always that but, execution, once again, was 80% of the way. Anywho, there isn't really a whole lot of lore to this DLC, but unlike the Jakobs Cove DLC, the um this one is noted to be canon, or at least in part. There's a little bit of a questionable canonicity to the 3 DLCs from Borderlands 1. Um, the Jacob's Cove brings back characters like TK Baja as a zombie. And haha, very funny. They made it work. Maybe not ideally, but they did do something right. And Borderlands 1's whole spiel is the first DLC. So, the canonicity of the Zombie Apocalypse DLC is questionable. This one is guaranteed to be canon because it ties in Athena and her being recognized by the Vault Hunters in the pre-sequel, as well as a little bit of the T-Bone Junction and the side stories that led into Moxie's Underdome riot and Mad Moxie becoming a prevalent character in the later stages of the game.
When you get inside the walls, find an echo transmitter so I know you made it.
Anywho, with that, we end up with I suppose, the third and final DLC. And it is squarely in the middle in terms of canonicity. And this would be the Claptrap's Revolution. And I'll be 100% honest. It is one that I couldn't really claim one way or the other.
I bet those bitches weren't expecting you to land on their heads. Okay. I'm sure
So,
Mr. Shank is holding your girl in one of those cell blocks. Get inside the building.
how do I put this?
Your only hope of getting Athena out is this little teleporter device she had. We were hit so fast at the club she didn't get a chance to use it. I can guarantee Mr. Shank has it in his possession by now. You'll need to get it from him. No doubt this is an over-my-dead-body kind of situation for him, so don't feel bad when you have to kill him. Aim low.
Okay, the canonicity of the third major DLC that I'm covering is the Revolution. And Claptrap's Revolution actually has some very far-reaching conclusions within the Borderlands universe. So, in Borderlands 2, it is shown that all of the Claptrap units, except Claptrap, have been shut down.
Hey, are you attempting stealth? I mean, is this what stealth looks like to you? You're on camera, by the way, and this is the first non-rerun that we've all seen in like 14 years. Chaz even made chili cheese fries. Chaz is really nice. Hey, I'm not into him. No.
Anywho,
And if you're
all 3 of the final bosses, sorry, 2 of the final bosses, that being Dr. Ned, as well as General KNOXX, show up twice in the DLC or in the third DLC. And the reason is because the Hyperion tech for Claptraps is too compatible. It can take over any cybernetic electronic out there, and, provided enough time, could even be used to take over the minds of living beings, making anything that has a transmitter on it under the will of Claptrap. This is due to Dark Trap. I think it's Dark Trap that shows up in the DLC of Borderlands the pre-sequel. Dark Trap shows up as a villain of sorts that's entirely meant to be a foil to Claptrap. Claptrap is a funny little robot. His whole stick is he is meant to be happy-go-lucky. He is a mistake waiting to happen. And we love him for it. But Dark Trap takes that and goes wild with it. It is his dark side. It is his evil side. Dark Trap is the interplanetary ninja assassin in Claptrap. And so, Dark Trap acts out of court. And he, becoming the interplanetary ninja assassin, piques Handsome Jack's interest. And of course, because Jack's interested in it, he seeks a way to exploit it during his mission to take over Hyperion. When he manages to do so, he then shuts down Claptrap, believing it to be a threat to his empire as it's already rebelled once. And while Claptrap was reset, that doesn't mean that everything is going to go back to normal. And so we end up with Claptrap having canon reasons for his existence and his lack of other Claptraps showing up in later games. Right there, but it has to be DLC enforced. I like this, I dislike this. It really depends on how... They didn't really stick the landing in 1, but they did a phenomenal job in Borderlands 2 fleshing out the world through Claptrap's eyes. Or, Borderlands pre-sequel through Claptrap's eyes. Anywho, I've probably made that mistake more times than I can count in this, and I apologize. I'm very stuck in certain mindsets within this. That being that each game is in sequence with the prior one. Anywho, we are going to take down, I guess his name is Shank? I like Shank. Shank is kind of funny, but he's funny in the bad way. He is by far and away far more intelligent than any of the other bandit leaders that we fight against throughout the entire game, excluding probably Flint. But his weapon of choice, I'll give you 3 guesses, doesn't exactly meld well with the everybody and their dog has guns. With guns for days and most of the merchandise out there being ripped from the hands of dead adventurers, it really puts a damper on his capabilities, being a short-ranged fighter. Was he not supposed to show up? I don't want to drive all this way again. Mr. Shank, can you please appear? Okay, I guess I gotta try to get back up. Oh, hello. Anywho, Mr. Shank is playing a really mean game of hide and seek. Ironically, I think that he would be one of those characters that would be interesting to fight with a different weapon set. Like, facing a teleporting enemy that focuses more so on melee combat, depending on how you pronounce it, I think would be interesting with different builds. If you fight him with just shotguns, it's kind of, oh yeah, he is coming right at you, la-di-da, that's it. If you are dealing with an opponent, or if you're using weapons like sniper rifles as your main weapon, his teleporting is going to be a lot more detrimental than the shotgunner. And likewise with the pistol, he is pretty easy to take down. But the weapon I think that would be the most fun to fight him with is ironically Brick's what do I want to call them? Meat tenderizers? His fists of fury. Brick's whole shtick being fighting brawn with brawn, tackling every problem with his bare hands, leaves, in some cases, a lot to be desired. But given the type of game that Borderlands is, Brick's whole identity has actually grown on me. So, when I first started playing Borderlands, I specifically started with Borderlands 2. And I stuck with 0 because I believed that being a sniper with a affinity for shotguns or close range weapons would be ideal. The melee mix-ups with long range was, in my opinion, the best way of going about it. And I think I made a pretty good choice overall for my first character. The Gunzerker, of course, is more akin to the identity of Borderlands, but I argue that Brick actually does more with it. Him being the close range fighter means he's better in a very small facet of the game. He let his guard down.
Your rescue is most agreeable. Thank you. But to be honest, mostly they just wanted to do my nails and talk about boys all the time. I almost sort of liked it here. They were like the sisters I never had because Atlas duped me into killing them. Wow, that got heavy, didn't it? Never mind. I don't have time to explain everything right now. I need the teleporter straight away. Just give me the PTD.
Yeah, if that has a tendency to go bad. Anyways, if you like what you see, drop a like, leave a sub. We'll catch you next time. Until then, I hope you have a good one.